Greetings everyone, and welcome to another Halloween horror movie review. Today we'll be continuing our journey through the Universal Monsters saga with 1940's The Invisible Man Returns. Yes, 7 years after the original Invisible Man, Universal decided to do a very direct sequel. Now this time it stars Vincent Price in what is actually his very first horror movie. Oh, he'd done a few other movies beforehand, but we of course know him now as the Prince of Horror, and he has legendary horror icon status. Well, The Invisible Man Returns is where that all started. That's ground zero. And, boy, keep an eye on that Vincent guy. He's going places. Alrighty, The Invisible Man Returns. Let's talk about it today on the Multimedia Chronicles. Welcome back. So Vincent Price plays Jeffrey Radcliffe, the owner of a local coal mining operation. And as our story opens, he's in prison, awaiting execution for the murder of his brother, Michael. So Jeffrey's fiancée, Helen Manson, played by the wonderful Nan Gray, who incidentally we last saw as Lily in Dracula's Daughter, the ill-fated artist's model that I went on and on about how wonderful she was in that. So anyway, his fiancée, Helen, is sure that he's been set up, that he's been framed. He's got to be innocent. There's no way he ever would have killed his brother. She implores their good friend and associate, Richard Cobb, played by Sir Cedric Hardwicke, someone that we're going to see a lot more of in the coming movies, by the way. He appears in quite a few of the Universal Monster movies. She implores him to call in some favors, see if there's anything they can do to stay the execution, just so that they have a little bit more time to try to prove his innocence. So he makes a few phone calls, but there's just nothing they can do. Radcliffe is going to be executed at dawn. Meanwhile, another friend of theirs, Dr. Frank Griffin, played by John Sutton, also believes that Jeffrey is innocent. He goes to visit Jeffrey in his cell, presumably to give him some kind words and reassurances, and then he leaves. The guards watching over Jeffrey are quite alarmed when they go in to check on him to discover that he's vanished. All they see in his place is a small pile of his clothes. So a police inspector by the name of Sampson goes to investigate, played, by the way, by wonderful character actor Cecil Kellaway. We'll also be seeing him in some of the other Universal Monster movies. He goes to investigate, he questions the officers in charge, and the officers who were in charge of guarding Radcliffe are completely baffled by what's going on. They said, well, we were looking after him, and he went into the washroom to clean up, and then we called to him, but there was no answer, and we went and checked, and there was nothing there but a pile of his clothes. And the officers are adamant. They said, I know it sounds unbelievable, nobody believes us, but I swear that that's what happened. And Sampson just starts laughing. He says, oh, I believe you. In fact, I completely believe you that that's exactly what happened. Because Sampson is familiar with the Invisible Man case from several years earlier. And he finds it more than a little suspicious that the last visitor Jeffrey Radcliffe had was Dr. Frank Griffin, the scientist brother of Dr. John Griffin, who we of course knew as Jack Griffin in the previous movie. Why is it that Jack, by the way, is a nickname for John? I've never understood that. Like Robert, Bob, William, Bill. I kind of get those. There's a logic to them, but John, Jack. Never understood that. So Inspector Sampson is pretty sure he knows what happened. He suspects that Frank Griffin may indeed be continuing the invisibility experiments that his brother did a few years earlier, and gave Radcliffe some version of the serum so he could just walk out of his cell. So he goes to question Frank and says, well, if that indeed is what you did, I wonder if you solved the problem of duocaine, one of the main ingredients of it, causing insanity. Yeah, they changed that. Back in the original, it was monocaine, and this one, for some reason, it's duocaine. I don't know why, just one of those little things that they changed arbitrarily. And he goes on to say, if that was the case, hopefully you found a way to bring him back to visibility before the insanity of the duocaine kicks in. But I guess if you didn't actually do anything, then we have nothing to worry about there, do we? Like, he's totally playing with him, but needless to say, Frank denies having any knowledge of what happens. Like, yeah, I went to see him, but, you know, I don't know what you're talking about otherwise. So the inspector just kind of leaves him be, but he's pretty sure it's only a matter of time before Frank fesses up to what's going on. But he's just going to kind of hang back and see what happens for now. Meanwhile, needless to say, the inspector is completely right, and that's exactly what Frank did. However, there's a problem. He did it out of desperation to help Jeffrey, but does not in fact have the antidote yet. We see several scenes where he's actually performing experiments on guinea pigs and manages to bring them back to visibility, but they die shortly afterwards. So he hasn't figured out a way to bring him back safely. So meanwhile, Jeffrey just has to stay invisible and hope that he doesn't go crazy from the duocaine. But of course, Frank didn't just help him so he could escape. He helped him so he could get out and hopefully be able to prove his innocence. Then bring him back to visibility so he can prove his innocence. But being a plan concocted out of desperation because Jeffrey was going to be executed the next morning, there wasn't any time to perfect the formula. It was basically just, you know, this could help. Let's do this. And Jeffrey was just like, okay, let's do this. Banking on the possibility that Frank will be able to quickly figure out the antidote. Something that Jack Griffin had been trying to figure out for years. And of course, died, unable to find the solution. The only thing that brought him back to visibility was death. So that's just the setup. That's like the first 20 minutes of the movie. So then the rest of it, we've got this tense, fast-paced race against time. We got Frank desperately trying to find the antidote to bring Jeffrey back to visibility before the duocaine drives him insane. And we got Jeffrey out there trying to prove his innocence and find out who actually killed his brother and why and what all those circumstances were, while he himself is trying not to go insane. So there's a lot going on in this movie, and it's actually, you know, quite the fast-paced little thriller with the sci-fi element of Jeffrey Radcliffe being invisible thrown into the mix. So it's a lot of fun. I actually really enjoyed it a lot. And much like the first movie, you may recall I was talking about how smart the police were and how they dealt with it. It's much the same in this one, too. Like, with Inspector Sampson, for example, you rarely see him without a cigar. He's just puffing away at a cigar, big billowy puffs of smoke. And the reason he's doing that is to make sure the Invisible Man isn't standing right next to him. In fact, there's a scene where he's talking to Richard Cobb, where Richard has encountered the Invisible Man. He's freaking out. He's like, Jeffrey's here. He's somehow become invisible. I don't know where he is. I can't see him. And Sampson says, here, have a cigar. Then perhaps you will. I just love how calm and together Sampson is. Like, he already knows the old case, so he knows exactly what's going on. And he's just like, boom, 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 like, okay, he's invisible. It's another Invisible Man thing. This is what we have to do. Like, everybody get organized. As he's talking to Cobb, he blows a puff of smoke over to the side, and you see his silhouette kind of puff into existence in the smoke. And he realizes he's been seen, and he just quickly looks, and Sampson takes a lunge at him, but he gets away. But then they bring in police officers with gas masks, and they're just filling the house with smoke. They're sure he's still in there somewhere. They fill the house with smoke. They seal off the doors and windows. They're gonna find him. I won't tell you how it all plays out, but Radcliffe finds a pretty clever solution to the problem, shall we say. So later on, there's a scene where he and Helen and Griffin are all sitting at dinner, and it becomes very clear that the duocaine is starting to have an adverse effect on his psyche. He's starting to have kind of power trip rants and such, much like Jack Griffin did in the original, about how being invisible is like having a superpower, like you can get away with anything, you can do anything. Both Frank and Helen are realizing that, oh boy, we're running out of time here, he's starting to lose it. So I talked quite a bit about the special effects in the 1933 film and how jaw-dropping they are. Yeah, it's much the same with this one, actually. They use a lot of the same techniques, you can tell, where he's like wearing the black velvet against a black background and such. In fact, the aforementioned dinner scene, there's a moment where he comes in just wearing a robe and he has his head unbandaged, so it's just like this headless robe sitting there. And he takes a sip of wine, and if you look closely, you can actually see where there's a wet spot in the velvet where he sipped the wine. So you just see like this kind of floating wet spot as he's talking. So yeah, I thought that was kind of funny. Bit of a giveaway there. And also the aforementioned effect of when the inspector blows the smoke and you see the form was very well done. I was not expecting it to look as good as it did, but it's actually very effective. And when you see his form appear in the smoke and Radcliffe realizes he's been made, he quickly looks. It's like it's not just a cardboard cutout. It's actually, you know, Vincent Price being invisible in the smoke. It's quite an impressive effect. And there's a lot of the other obligatory gags, like where he's got a guy at gunpoint, so you see the gun floating along. There's a few spots where you can visibly see the strings there. But overall, the effects in this are really, really good. There's another great scene where he's chasing down a guy who he's sure has knowledge of what really happened with the murder and everything. He's on the outside of his car as he's driving, and he lifts up one side of the hood, and the guy driving is just like, what's going on? So he stops, and he gets out of the car, and then he sees like wires unhooking themselves from the engine, and he goes and puts them back in. Then another one unhooks, he puts that one back in, another one unhooks. So it's like he's there invisible, just like unplugging things as the guy's plugging them back in, and it's pretty funny. And on top of that, the guy's been drinking too, so he thinks he's just like losing it from being drunk. A chase ensues where he chases him through the forest and kind of convinces him that he's a ghost and freaks him out, and then manages to get information from him. But it's quite a good scene, full of lots of really cool and fun invisibility gags. I should mention one of the other main supporting characters in this is none other than Alan Napier. Plays Willie Spears, who's the new foreman of the coal mining operation since Radcliffe has been put in jail. Alan Napier, of course, you'll probably remember as Alfred in the 60s Batman series. Yeah, I almost didn't recognize him. I saw his name in the credits, so I was keeping an eye out for him. But you'll recognize his face. He looks quite scruffy compared to how we're used to seeing him as Alfred. And he doesn't have the glasses on, and he speaks with more of a, I don't know, kind of a Cockney accent rather than his usual posh accent. So yeah, quite a good character actor, and it's fun to see him in this old Universal Monsters movie, you know. And he was obviously having a lot of fun with the role as well. It's a little bit of a comedic turn for him. He's quite a fun character, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. He's supposed to be kind of unlikable, but when you realize how he figures into everything, you kind of almost feel sorry for him in a way. So it's an interesting kind of, you know, dichotomy. You have the unlikableness, but at the same time he's kind of been victimized in a way, I guess you could say. But anyway, the way Alan Napier plays the character is just a hoot to watch. He was obviously having a lot of fun with it. So just a little interesting behind-the-scenes tidbit I found out about. Apparently the director, Joe May, was actually German and didn't speak any English. So he had a little trouble communicating his instructions to the cast and crew. However, as it turns out, Vincent Price was actually fluent in German. So he was able to talk with the director and help to communicate the director's wishes to everybody else. So go Vincent. So I'm sure that got him in a lot of good graces on that set. Holy moly. But yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting, how if it wasn't for Vincent Price being in that movie, it might have been a very difficult shoot indeed. Having to mime everything to the cast and crew, I guess. I don't know. So yeah, I have to say I really enjoyed The Invisible Man Returns. I think it's actually a pretty solid sequel to the original. It has a lot of the same kind of humor that the original had, but it does have a different dynamic to it, because whereas in the first one, Jack Griffin just kind of goes nuts from the monocaine and ends up killing a bunch of people and what have you. In this one, we have a man who is trying to prove his innocence. and he has used this drug to try to help himself to prove his innocence. It puts him in conflict with himself. So we have a bit of man versus himself here, one of the classic plot scenarios. So you almost feel bad for Radcliffe in this case, because you're concerned that, oh my God, what if he loses it and kills somebody? Then he's not innocent anymore. So there's a real tension there as you're hoping that the character is able to prove his innocence and then get back to normal before he does something that he can't come back from. So there's a lot of layers going on in the story here that I think really add to the tension and the suspense and the complexity of the plot. It works very well, and I like that it is familiar. It has a lot of familiar elements from the previous one, but shifts the dynamic like that so that we're actually rooting for the character in a much different way than we may have been rooting for him in the previous one. In the previous one, it's like we're rooting for him because, like, yeah, go get him. I know you're the bad guy, but I don't care. Whereas this one, it's like, oh no, don't do something you can't come back from, which is great. There's another small, actually quite touching scene where the Invisible Man borrows the clothes from a scarecrow. Quite an unexpectedly sweet little moment. I actually really liked that scene a lot. I should mention, talking about how good the effects were in this, it was actually nominated for an Academy Award for the visual effects. Yeah, didn't win. I don't know what won that year. But it was nominated, so that's something. And speaking of special effects, of course, at the end of every Invisible Man movie, you have to have the Invisible Man return to visibility. And wow, that sequence in this movie is amazing and surprisingly graphic for 1940. Like, they really kind of pushed the envelope with this one. Alrighty, well, that's The Invisible Man Returns. So, check it out if you enjoyed the original. I think it's a pretty worthy sequel. And, you know, it's Vincent Price's first horror movie, so double reason to check it out. Alrighty, well, that is it from me to you for now. So as always, if you'd like to add the Invisible Man Legacy Collection to your collection, you'll find Amazon links in the description below, both to the individual Legacy Collection and the 30-film complete collection of all the Universal Monsters movies. So, big thanks to you for watching. Big thanks to my Patreon sponsors. Be sure to catch me on Twitch. I stream almost every day, and I'll see you next time. Until then, sayonara.